Welcome to our program, Asia in Focus, Clean Air and the Business and Human Rights Agenda. My name is Sean Lees, and I work for the United Nations Development Program. In partnership with the European Union, this program is the first of several exploring the connections between the environment and human rights. Today, we look at the challenge of air pollution in Asia. What is the responsibility of industry to respect our right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment? What are the trade-offs that need to be considered? And are those trade-offs worth making? Please join us for an illuminating discussion with our experts. Our topic today is air pollution and its impact on our health, economy, and human rights. By many measures, air pollution is Asia's most pressing environmental and public health challenge. Indeed, 49 of the top 50 cities most affected by air pollution are found in Asia. 92% of the region's population is exposed to unsafe levels of PM 2.5 and other toxins. How do we mitigate air pollution in Asia? Who, if anyone, should be held responsible? And what role do human rights protections play in ensuring results from government and industry? To provide some insights, I'm joined today by clean air advocates and experts who've been working in the regions for decades. Later, we will air a short documentary on efforts to curb air pollution in India. Now, for our first segment, I'd like to introduce Winarin Luliratonda, who is the co-founder of the Thai Clean Air Network, and Diane Archer, a senior research fellow at Stockholm Environment Institute. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Weena, let's start with you. There is a common perception that despite growing awareness, air pollution levels are going through the roof. They're increasing year after year after year. Is that true? Is that fair? And if so, why?
That's a good question, Sean. Air pollution is a problem. I think globally, if you look about it, it's really about the way our entire economic system is predicated on capitalism. So the more you produce, right, the more you generate in terms of economic growth. And when you produce, the byproduct obviously is pollution and a lot of waste issues. So that's part of it. I think COVID has given us a bit of a respite. So we've actually seen, what life is like when there's less air pollution, but unfortunately it's just a temporary blip. I think here in Asia, specifically in Southeast Asia, if you look at the hotspot cities, we're sort of on similar levels. It's pretty bad. But a couple of months ago, actually, the University of Chicago did a study, and they actually pulled together an interesting graph, where they mapped the PM 2.5 levels, and they compared China and Jakarta, Hanoi, and Bangkok. Right now, China really peaked in about 2013, and they've had a huge fight against air pollution, and they're a phenomenal case in terms of how that's been achieved. And so their pollutions are coming way off, which is fantastic. Within the other three Southeast Asian countries, our levels are sort of similar-ish, but I think the positive thing you can take out of that is that at least with Jakarta and Hanoi, there looks to be a trend of going downwards in terms of the levels. But unfortunately for Chiang Mai, which was the other comparable city in Thailand that was used, the trend is going up. Yeah.
So it's uneven. It's not fair to say across the board air pollution is going up. We've seen some success in China. We've seen some success perhaps in Hanoi. It's year to year, and it's uneven in that regard. Let me talk to you a little bit about your engagement as an advocate with wider society in Thailand. You wrote a letter to the government recently promoting a citizen-drafted, citizen-led bill to combat air pollution. And in that letter, you wrote, "The biggest obstacle to addressing air pollution effectively is a structural one." What did you mean by that?
What we mean is, like in many countries, one of the problems with specifically related to environmental matters, but specifically to air pollution, is that there isn't any one entity that's fully responsible for addressing it, right? And when you don't have some entity or governmental entity that's fully responsible for it, it's like a hot potato that gets tossed around a lot. And that's definitely the case here in Thailand and in many, many parts of the world. That's been an issue. And so that is one of the things that we've really addressed in the Citizen-Led Clean Air Act, is to deal with the underlying structural problem that will enable all stakeholders to focus on this issue in the right way. Yeah.
In prior conversations, you spoke to data as being very important. what developments around technology and data have occurred around the region to help facilitate either greater awareness or finding of solutions?
Oh, it's been immense, actually. I think one of the key things is not just being aware of what is wrong with the air that you're breathing in, but what can you do about it? And one of the issue that has stopped people from really taking action is the lack of data transparency, right? Not knowing, what is the source, right? And that's a bit of a chicken and egg problem often. But in Asia, I think we've got some amazing developments. And one example coming out of China, which is the Blue Map app. And that is really mapping all the polluting industries and showing which ones have been in violation and color coding it and using it in a way that's so visual and easy for people to track that, instead of just people complaining amongst themselves that air pollution is bad, they actually can track where, and they can actually use social media to push the government ministries and the responsible factories to clean up their operation. And that's been extremely successful. And then here within Asia, there's been a lot of use of satellite data, as well as in combination with low-cost sensors to help supplement the official sensor data so that there's more data spots for people to actually, to take policies that make sense.
So in our documentary later today or later in this program, we're going to detail how that's being done in India. Before I turn to Diane, you did mention governance and how important governance is, but when you evoke issues of governance and evoke issues of data, these can be very sensitive issues. They can be political issues. In fact, air pollution is increasingly becoming a hot button political issue. Is it a good idea to politicize the air pollution issue, or does it do more harm than good?
Air pollution should never, ever be a political issue. This is something that has to be above politics. I mean, if I want to take everybody a step back, we are fighting for the right to breathe, which is actually inherently the right to life itself. So how can that be political, right? It doesn't matter who you are. You can be a government official, you can be a business person, or a man on the street. This is about you and your right to live. So it cannot, and it should never be a political issue.
Okay. Yeah. Now, Diane, you've been studying the impact of air pollution on urban populations in Asia and Africa, other places, for many years now. Well, let me ask you, do you agree with Weena that this should not be a political issue, that it should be a public health issue, almost a public health emergency in some settings, or do you think we should take a broader lens?
I definitely agree that it's a public health issue. We know the costs of inaction on people's health. And I also think we should consider it an environmental issue. A lot of the impacts of air pollution are very much related to climate change. So the more air pollution we have, that means the more emissions we're generating, which means we're contributing to further climate change in the future. So if we can address both of them hand in hand, we will have benefits both for people's health and therefore general economic productivity, but also good well-being and happiness. And we will be addressing the pressing climate change issue that we really need to tackle.
You mentioned cost of inaction. And for many advocates, researchers, academics, they often say the cost of inaction is too high. But do we have an honest accounting of the cost of action? I mean, if we increase measures to enforce air pollution mitigation laws, we're asking industry to bear a lot of those costs. Are we going to be shutting factories down? Are we going to be putting smallholder farmers out of work or force them to lose their livelihoods? Are we going to make certain countries that take on the air pollution issue less competitive than their neighbors?
Mm-hmm. Well, we can say for sure that the costs of inaction are obvious. 7.4% of GDP lost due to welfare losses arising from health issues from air pollution in Asia and the Pacific only. So that's already a huge cost burden on the economy. And then if we're talking about the agricultural sector, we know that haze and smog has negative impacts on agricultural yields as well. So people are losing out by not acting on air pollution. So we also know that there are definitely ways to act on air pollution and that there are industries and businesses and farmers who are taking action. So it's a question of how do we scale this up? and so that we can all benefit from the improvement in air quality, and by conjunction, the economy will also benefit.
How do we scale up, and why haven't we scaled up? If it's so obvious, why haven't we scaled up on the solutions?
I think part of the problem is a lack of awareness, firstly, that air pollution really is something we have to tackle, and that the health burdens of air pollution have negative impacts on workers' productivity. So that's we need to raise awareness on that front with business owners, for example. And I think the other issue is also lack of awareness that actually some of the solutions are not that costly, and they can have co-benefits. So for example, in the agricultural sector, rather than burning crop residue, if you compost it and then apply that compost to your fields, then you will gain greater yields in future. So there is definitely scope for action.
You keep coming back to agriculture. This is a question for perhaps both of you. You keep coming back to it. You've come back to I've even made references to industry generally speaking. But isn't it true that air pollution sources are multiple, are varied, multitudinous? Is that part of the problem, that it's not just one source, it's not just one industry? And isn't that a reason why it's so hard to grapple with? Is this a long-term fight that we're going to have to engage in, or is it something if we just put our mind into and prioritize, we can come up with a solution relatively quickly? Let me start with you, Diane, and then ask Weena.
Well, I think, like Weena said, because there are many sources of pollution, and we know there are different sources of pollution, for example, from agriculture, but also the construction sector, manufacturing and transport sector. Those are the key sources of air pollution. It also means, like Weena said, that the buck can be passed around because, oh, well, we'll let that ministry deal with it rather than us dealing with it. Or a particular sector might feel like, well, if they take action, there's no point because we're still going to get pollution from the other sectors. But actually, I think that's more of a reason for everyone to be acting on air pollution, because the more action there is to limit air pollution, then the more we will feel the benefits for everyone across the board.
So Weena, do you agree that we need to take an all-in approach, all at once approach, or do you think we should be prioritizing one industry or one problem at a time and checking off the list?
I think the issue is so big, it really does need to be addressed very urgently and quickly, because the cost of it is our lives. I mean, as simple and plain as that. Just to take back the question, to also add to what Diana has said, yes. The question you raised about, sort of the business imperative on all this, I would give you a counterfactual. If it's the case that businesses that change their operations, green it, to reduce air pollution issues is going to be so bad for businesses, then all the countries that have successfully dealt with this would have gone bust, right?
Certainly wouldn't be doing as well as they are.
And they're all doing well. Yeah. And they're all doing well.
Well, look, we've unpacked many different issues this morning in this first segment, and I just want to say thank you, Diane, thank you, Weena, for being here today and sharing your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Now, let's turn our attention to India. Over several decades, India's fast-growing economy has lifted millions out of extreme poverty. But as India continues to grow, air pollution challenges have led to significant health consequences for workers and society at large. What measures can the government take to protect the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment? Is technology the answer to our problems, or do we need a seismic shift in business practices? In this short documentary, we're going to take a closer look at efforts to control air pollution from India's brick kilns.
India's integration into the global economy during the past decades has seen millions lifted out of extreme poverty, and the country itself emerging as a global player. However, as India continues to industrialize and urbanize, the country is now facing significant levels of air pollution that may have implications for future growth. Air quality in India has been deteriorating at an alarming rate. In 2019, the government estimated that 1.7 million people may have died prematurely from air pollution, while various studies and assessments have been undertaken to measure and monitor the impact of emissions from power plants, traffic, and even stubble burning, little is known about brick kilns. India is estimated to have more than 100,000 brick kilns across the country, with the industry being the third largest consumer of coal.
The most widely used brick is, of course, the clay brick. There is still no alternative to the clay bricks. Now, in India, the burnt clay bricks, we are following the hundreds of years, one of the most old and primitive technologies. The major raw material used for firing is still coal. When you are feeding in the coal, it results in an ash, suspended particulate matter in the case of PM10, and another one important thing is PM2.5. PM2.5 is the finest kind of particles which doesn't settle. It moves large distances, 30, 40, 50 kilometers, and pollutes the villages. And if you see this is most of the people in and around a brick kiln, or even people who are working in the brick kilns, they suffer from bronchial diseases, they suffer from silicosis, and they suffer from lungs and heart diseases. They don't have any sort of social security into this. Exploited, no basic facilities. Well, for your daily routines, you go to the field, very, very basic kind of an one room kind of a structure made with GI sheets, unbearable in the summer months. So basically it's very hard. It's very hard.
The decentralized nature of the brick kiln industry, generally confined to rural and semi-urban areas, makes it difficult for authorities to identify, monitor, and regulate. The eastern Indian state of Bihar is one example. With over 6,500 brick kilns throughout its borders, regulating them all can seem a daunting task.
Brick kiln was a major factor, contributing factor as far as air pollution is concerned. The first step was to convert the brick kilns from old technology to clean technology, greener technology. And our initiative that is giving result, and almost more than 4,000 brick kilns they have converted to new technology. But the problem was the basic database. Bihar is a big state and number of brick kilns is enormous. So getting the exact location, georeferenced location for all the brick kilns, that was a difficult task.
In an attempt to overcome this hurdle, the Bihar State Pollution Control Board, in collaboration with the UNDP Accelerator Lab, have been using satellite imagery to detect the exact locations of non-compliant brick kilns throughout the area. Since brick manufacturing units have distinct spatial features, they can be detected from satellite imagery using object detection algorithms. Dubbed the GeoAI platform, this artificial intelligence technology helps environment and labor regulators tackle the issue head-on.
So this gives us a right picture about how many brick kilns structures are located, are operational. So presently, based on the data provided by UNDP so far, we have initiated the physical verification process, which our inspectors are doing at the field presently. And this technology will go a long way in regulating the brick kiln sectors in the state to ultimately reduce the emission level.
If you see the brick kilns, one of the worst affected are the workers. But there are in certain cases very good examples where people or entrepreneurs have taken care of their employees. So what I would suggest here is, if this kind of good examples can be replicated, it pays you off. People say that it is an investment. It is an investment. If you talk to these entrepreneurs, they said that, well, it is an investment that we have made. The good thing is that the same people comes back to us each and every year.
Let's welcome Nusrat Khan, UNDP's Business and Human Rights Specialist in India. Nusrat, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Sean, for having me here.
Tell me, how are efforts of the government to address air pollution indicative of other efforts the government's undertaking to address environmental harms caused by business operations elsewhere?
That's a great question, Sean, a very important one. And of course, India has a number of legislations that cover a wide range of environmental issues, and many of them impose fairly stringent legal obligations on business enterprises. Also, the Supreme Court of India has on multiple occasions recognized the right to a clean and healthy environment as an integral part of the right to life, guaranteed under the Indian Constitution. And this is, of course, because of the scale of the air pollution problem in India, which cannot be underscored enough. A recent study has, in fact, attributed the increase in air pollution related deaths across the region, South Asia and Southeast Asia, to industrial pollution such as ambient air pollution and chemical pollution. And given this situation, the issue certainly remains a priority for the Indian government, which continues to focus on the effective implementation of laws and policies, including the very recent 2020 National Cleanair program.
Now, UNDP has been working with the government on the 2020 Clean Air program for some time now, but you're also working with the government on the implementation of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Tell me, what is the intersection between this business and human rights agenda and air pollution?
That's right. I mean, we have been at UNDP supporting the government of India on this agenda. And of course, the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, they present an excellent framework to guide state actions or to address human rights impacts of businesses. And aligned with this objective, the Indian government, in particular the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, is working on a national action plan on business and human rights, which is expected to focus much greater attention to business-related adverse impacts, including business impact on the environment and health.
Thank you very much, Nusrat, for your insights today.
Thanks, Sean, for having me.
Next on Asia in Focus, Clean Air and the Business and Human Rights Agenda, we have in the studio BJ Schulte, a Mekong policy and legal advisor with Earthrights International, and Grita Anandarini from Indonesia Center for Environmental Law, who's joining us live from Jakarta. Welcome, BJ and Grita.
Thank you, Sean.
Grita, let me start with you. What, in your view, are the main challenges in Indonesia to making progress on air pollution? Are the obstacles similar to other countries, or is each country too unique to draw lessons?
I see that each countries will face different challenges because you know that each country certainly will have different major sources of air pollution, and each countries will have different meteorological and geographical condition. But I could see that the similar things between all these becomes the availability and the transparency of the data. In Indonesia, for example, where the one of the main challenges is the lack of air quality monitoring system and emission inventory, and this becomes the obstacle to make progress on air pollution control.
So you're saying the biggest challenge for Indonesia is data collection and analysis. Is that fair?
Yeah, the data collection and the transparency as well. Yeah.
Now, in some contexts, civil society and civic engagement has been very important to moving the needle, to getting the government to invest more in data collection, etc. Has that also been true in Indonesia? Where do we stand with the level of citizen engagement on air pollution issues in Indonesia?
The engagement between CSOs and broader public obviously becomes stronger, and when the CSOs and public move together, obviously could make larger impacts. And I also note that the most important thing is how the CSO could provide the data, how the CSOs could provide scientific data to be the fuel in the movement. Because you know that when we talk about the air pollution, we talk about scientific data, and we talk about how the CSO could craft the scientific-based advocacy. It's become important.
Does it make a difference that the Human Rights Council recently recognized the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as a human right? Greta, does identifying air pollution as a human right make a difference? Is it a game changer here?
Yes, but one thing that we should note that even our constitution, our Indonesian constitution, already recognized that good and healthy environment as one part of human rights. Actually, approaching air quality from a human rights perspective can also becomes or serve as a catalyst, for acceleration action to achieve the clean air, to empower those who work uh, in many areas to improve the air quality, and to give more understanding to people that this is a basic rights.
Let's say you're sitting opposite the chairperson of a major company in a specific industry, and you have a moment to say a few things to them. What industry would that chairperson be in, and what would you tell them to do to address air pollution?
I will say that that it is not the government obligation. It is not only the state obligation, to protect the environment, to protect the to protect our air quality, but it also becomes your obligations on that. It's also become us, our obligation, not only you actually, but also me as one part of the public, one part of the citizens. I mean, so if you could, being, for example, being transparent of your being compliant to the law. I mean, if you could be compliant to the law, and just consider your business impacts, your activities impacts on air pollution, and to us as public, as citizens who affected by your business. It only that it being happen to your family, what would you do? So, when we talk about air pollution, we talk about basic rights. We talk about right to life. So, I think that's the thing that you should consider on how your business, how your activities really have impact to do right to life for every citizen in the country.
Thank you, Greta. I'm going to move to BJ now, and maybe widen our view outside of Indonesia. Tell me, based on your experience on helping to reduce air pollution, both inside and outside of Asia, are there lessons to be taken on a global level for countries like Indonesia, Thailand, Mongolia, India? What are the most important lessons? Can the lessons where we have successfully addressed air pollution be transferred elsewhere?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think there are many lessons. There are two that I would highlight. One is simply the mechanics of air pollution control. I'm American, so my frame of reference is often the United States. And one very important lesson I usually try to bring up with people is that going back 50 years ago, when we first adopted the Clean Air Act to address our air pollution problem, there was no permitting system in the original act. And so we operated for 20 years without any permitting system, which made it incredibly difficult for regulators, for communities, and for regulated entities to actually figure out which emission standards apply to which facility, what are the emission standards, what are the reporting requirements. And so in 1990, they significantly amended the law to create a permitting system, essentially to streamline the whole process. And
and can that be, is that something that's easily adaptable elsewhere? Has it been tried? That kind of...
I think so, yeah. And we're actually seeing progress on that in this region. For example, China, going back maybe 6 or 7 years ago, adopted a new environmental protection law and air pollution control law that established environmental licensing system. Vietnam also recently amended its law to establish a licensing system.
So do you see air pollution mitigation efforts mostly as a governance issue? It's about getting the governance right, or is there more to it than that?
I think that there's a little bit of both. There are a lot of governance issues that I believe that if they were ironed out could go a long way towards addressing air pollution. For example, institutional responsibilities. A lot of the observations in this region, and this was a problem back in the United States before they adopted the Clean Air Act, was just a confusion of responsibilities among government agencies for implementing these requirements.
Weena made a similar comment in the first segment of our show. I'm going to put the same question I put to Greta with regards to the finding that a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is now recognized as a human right. Does that make any difference to someone who's looked at this problem mostly through a permitting and regulatory and a governance lens?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, on the one hand, yes, I do think it makes a big difference for a lot of the reasons that Greta brought up. But for me, the question always goes back to, okay, we recognize this right. How do we get there? How do we actually, create a system that helps us implement that right or realize that right? And that, to me, is largely a governance issue.
What is your answer to people who say, this is just a cost of growth?
And there's a lot of statistics out there about the economic cost to society at large of air pollution. And, we see that in terms of public health, but also in terms of, in certain places when the air pollution has become so bad, we see very acute effects like closure of airports, closure of schools. All of those things add up a lot of economic costs that I think gets lost in those conversations.
Well, what I'm taking away from this conversation is that there are many pathways forward. There are government needs to learn from experience of other governments in the region. That citizen engagement is key. In fact, it's critical, and so as is access to remedy. But and then thirdly, that business needs to show more ownership of the issues. Thank you very much, BJ. Thank you very much, Greta, for being here today.
Thank you, Sean, for having me.
Thank you, Sean.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, has been our program, Clean Air and the Business and Human Rights Agenda. Many thanks to our guests for their participation. We hope you'll want to learn more by reading our report on air pollution and by visiting our digital platform. Be sure to join us again as we explore water pollution and climate change in our upcoming webcast of Asia in Focus. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.